What you're looking at is footage of a silly little video game released over a decade ago called Naughty Bear. The plot consisted of a group of sentient teddy bears living in harmony on a fictional island named Perfection Island. The main protagonist is a bear aptly named Naughty, who is disliked by the other bears on the island due to his rude and sociopathic nature. When Naughty learns he is the only bear on the island not invited to a birthday party, he decides to go on a killing spree to seek revenge on everyone who shunned him. The objective of the game was to rack up as many Naughty points as possible, which you could accumulate by massacring Naughty's fellow teddy bear brethren in a multitude of ways. The fastest way to rack up Naughty points was through the use of terror tactics, which could be achieved through the use of traps, the presence of witnesses to particularly ridiculous executions, or engaging in episodes of extended physical or psychological torture, the latter of which can lead the victim to blow their own fluffy brains out in order to escape the torment. Jesus. It was a contrasting mix of cute teddy bears inflicting extreme violence on each other, but Naughty Bear was a commercial failure. Reviews of the game were mixed, to say the least. This was apparently due to repetitive gameplay, graphic violence, and a plethora of technical issues. While Naughty Bear wasn't exactly a smash hit, there was one single aspect of the game that was a diamond in the rough. A simple idea that, when expanded upon, would eventually lead to an entirely new genre of gaming, create jobs for thousands of people, and solidify its developers as pioneers in the industry. However, to get the full picture, we need to step back in time, almost 20 years before Naughty Bear's release.
New Sega Genesis 32.
Welcome to the next level.
In the early 1990s, a young property manager named Remi Racine had a budding knack for entrepreneurship, and off the enthusiasm from a friend, he began researching the promising video game industry. Video games had already existed for decades at this point. Sure, they were in their infancy compared to the games we know and love today, but the technology was evolving rapidly. And with any new industry comes money. A lot of money. In 1962, a multi-program video game system known as the Brown Box was invented by Ralph Baer. It was a prototype for the first multiplayer, multi-program video game system. The games you could play on the Brown Box included ping pong, checkers, 4 different sports games, target shooting with the use of a light gun, and a golf putting game which required the use of a special attachment. To play these games, the user placed one of these program cards between the 2 sets of switches on the Brown Box. While it may seem primitive to us looking back now, much like the theme of this video, it was the idea it created that was worth far more than anyone could ever imagine. Baer would then license the Brown Box to Magnavox for an undisclosed amount, who would go on to release the Magnavox Odyssey in 1972. Officially, the first ever video game console you could purchase and use directly with your dummy-thick television set. And thanks to Ralph Baer and the Magnavox Odyssey, the console gaming industry exploded. For the next 2 decades, console gaming would quickly evolve as millions of dollars came flooding in as companies, like Activision, were brought into existence. This period of time in the gaming industry is known as the console wars, as companies released more and more advanced consoles in order to satisfy the increasing consumer demand. And of course, with competition comes rivalries. One of the biggest during the console wars being Sega versus Nintendo.
What Nintendo?
Sega released its 16-bit Genesis console, and its rival Nintendo would follow suit, releasing its own 16-bit console. Somewhat relevant to Naughty Bear, in the early 1990s, violent video games slowly crept their way onto the scene. Now this topic probably deserves a video of its own, but to briefly touch on it, the early to mid-90s saw the release of a wealth of popular games on both consoles, including new franchises such as Street Fighter II and Mortal Kombat, a fighting game that depicted blood and gore on the Genesis version of the game. In response to the violent game, as well as congressional hearings about violent video games, Sega created the Video Game Rating Console in 1993 to provide descriptive labeling for every game sold on a Sega home console. The console later gives rise to the industry-wide Entertainment Software Rating Board, which is still used today to rate video games based on content. With the property manager Remi Racine watching the console gaming industry explode, he decided he wanted to get his slice of the digital pie. So, in 1992, he co-founded the game development studio Megatoon Entertainment Group in Quebec City alongside his friend Guy Boucher. Together, they started one of Canada's very first game studios. The first game Megatoon developed was called Gopherwinkle's Adventures: The Lavender Land. Potentially the weirdest title I have ever heard. Gopherwinkle's Adventures was an interactive comic book about a kid named William getting accidentally transported to the fantasy creature Gopherwinkle's home, and players must help guide the boy home. 2 years after that very strange game, Remi co-founded an interactive entertainment software company called Multimedia Interactive, or MMI. Then in 1996, Remi sold both Megatune and MMI to Malafilm Communications, which was later changed to Behaviour Communications when the founder Rene Malo retired in 1997 for health reasons, and Remi was appointed as the general manager. The year following the merge, the company now officially became Behaviour Interactive, and they were off to the races on their way to their very first IP debut. An IP, or intellectual property, is basically a piece of digital media, like a character, that someone created that they exclusively own the rights to commercially. Kind of like Batman and DC Comics or Disney and Winnie the Pooh. That was, of course, until the rights to Winnie the Pooh expired on January 1st, 2022, 95 years after its first publication, which is the legal limit a copyright can be held for in the US. This was hilariously capitalized on when a slasher film was produced featuring the famous fictional teddy bear in a film named Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, which is currently one of the worst reviewed movies of all time. But back to the topic at hand. As previously mentioned, Behaviour Interactive was all set to release their first official IP. Production for the game began in 1995, 2 years before the company merge. Jersey Devil was a 3D platformer and released on PlayStation and Windows in 1997.
He's mischievous. And he's in a city full of tough bosses, mind-bending puzzles, and mutant vegetables. Jersey Devil.
Oh, get off of me!
The game received mixed reviews. Much like its future sibling Naughty Bear, complaints about its shoddy camera controls and other flaws kept it from becoming anything more than mediocre at best. While Jersey Devil had all the right elements in place, it didn't have the proper tuning to make the whole thing work. What remains is a game with an irrefutable charm that at the same time is just plain exasperating to play. While Jersey Devil wasn't a breakout hit by any means, what it did show was that Behaviour Interactive was a serious developer with hidden potential, which Sony Computer Entertainment America noticed as they purchased the rights to Jersey Devil from Behaviour later the same year it was released. A couple years after Jersey Devil's release, so 1999, the then general manager Remi and some investors bought back the company, making Remi CEO and giving him full control of the company's destiny. However, due to the reacquisition, they were forced to change the company name yet again, deciding to rebrand to Artificial Mind and Movement, or the acronym A2M. Yes, you heard that right, A2M. We'll come back to that in a bit, just bear with me for a moment. With their foot firmly in the proverbial console gaming door, Artificial Minded Movement found their stride as a game developer, taking on work-for-hire projects with major clients like Disney, Nintendo, and Warner Brothers, to name a few. Work-for-hire projects are pretty self-explanatory. Company A hires Company B to develop a game that Company A will sell and own the rights to. Artificial Minded Movement would go the work-for-hire route for over a decade, developing games like The Grinch, Scooby-Doo Mystery Mayhem, Teen Titans, Power Rangers Super Legends, and many, many more. But from the company's very inception back in '92, their dream was always to release their own IPs. The work-for-hire stuff was just their way of keeping the lights on. It's no different than a musician playing cover songs on Broadway while dreaming of selling out arenas with their original music. In 2010, Behaviour, or Artificial Minded Movement, would make that dream a reality. Well, sort of. In 2010, Artificial Minded Movement would, you guessed it, rebrand once again. However, this would be the last time as they returned to their roots as Behaviour Interactive. When asked why the name change, Remi stated, "We're trying to do more and more of our own IP. Our name becomes more and more present to the game community when you do your own stuff, so that triggered the change. But let's not beat around the bush, pun intended, and figure out why they really changed the name." The studio's A2M nickname is also shared with the particularly obscene pornographic custom. Google searches for the company would routinely return indecorous results. When asked if this was an impetus for the name change, Racine simply replied, yes. But all jokes aside, Behaviour Interactive was back and they were no laughing matter. The same year, Behaviour would release arguably their most pivotal game, as what it inspired will forever go down in gaming history. Not for its graphics or its gameplay, but for one simple game mode and the idea it spawned. Naughty Bear is a 2010 action-adventure video game that revolves around a disgruntled teddy bear named Naughty. Set on a seemingly idyllic island inhabited by perfect teddy bears, Naughty, one of the bears who is considered an outcast due to his mischievous nature, embarks on a rampage of revenge after being excluded from a birthday party. Players take control of Naughty Bear as he wreaks havoc on the island, using a variety of weapons and stealth tactics to murder his former friends. The game features a humorous and over-the-top style of violence, with cartoonish gore and exaggerated animations. The game itself was nothing to write home to mom about. Its graphics were boring, its controls were janky at best. Overall, it was just very mid. But when developing the game, senior game designer Dave Richards stated, "At some point in developing Naughty Bear, our publisher 505 Games requested that we add a multiplayer mode. So we added 4. One of them, Jelly Wars, was a game in which 4 players would play normal bears, and their goal was to find jellies and bring them into a giant mixer. Another person would play the naughty bear, trying to kill them." If that sounds familiar, it's no coincidence. Dead by Daylight, or DBD, the game that would eventually propel Behaviour Interactive to unimaginable status in the gaming industry, would follow this exact premise.
The washer has finished running.
Great! 4 survivors need to repair 5 generators to power an exit gate to escape, while a single overpowered killer tries to hunt them down in an asymmetrical game of cat and mouse. Cat and mice. The 30 or so people at Behaviour were ecstatic. They saw something special in the idea behind DBD and eagerly got to work on a rough prototype. However, during the game's production, they were hit with the very real possibility of utter failure. 1 year before DBD's eventual release, the team watched as another game with eerily similar fundamentals met a somewhat early grave. Evolve was an asymmetrical title that pitted one monster against 4 hunters. Evolve rapidly tanked due to its repetitive formula, shaky game balance, and controversial paid downloadable content. I'm sure a lot of current DBD players would argue that DBD currently suffers from all of those same exact issues, but we'll touch on that more later. While watching the demise of Evolve unfold, Matthew Cote, DBD's original producer and who many in the community call the face of Dead by Daylight, had to say,
Like I remember playing Evolve before DBD launched, and it was an awesome game. It was beautiful, it was super polished, and you played a couple of times and you're like, okay, now I'll go play something else.
Side note, is it just me or does Matthew look quite similar to Dwight? Well, I guess it's just a coincidence, because it's a known fact that Dwight was modeled after a former Behaviour employee.
Obviously, Dwight is based on Jean-Marc Nelly. We've answered that in the past many, many times.
Instead of letting the failure of Evolve scare the team out of seeing DBD through, Behaviour instead took note of Evolve's failures and made sure they addressed them in their own game prior to launch. And this careful attention to learning from their own past mistakes as well as others paid off like no one on the small team at Behaviour Interactive could have ever imagined. 1 year later, on June 14th, 2016, the asymmetrical horror game Dead by Daylight was released to the world, in collaboration with the Swedish publisher Starbreeze. However, in true unfortunate Behaviour fashion, Dead by Daylight was initially released to mixed opinions. The game is entirely peer-to-peer hosted, with the killer hosting the survivors at all times. Unfortunately, there's no way to tell where in the world the killer is or whether they're capable of hosting 5 people in a game until you're playing. It was also noted on launch that there was no group-based matchmaking, so you can't queue with friends. This results in players lobby hopping until they are grouped with friends, which is a terrible experience for all involved. Seeing as the game was essentially the first of its kind, it's no surprise that it took a while to get on its feet. But the rocky start was not enough to thwart the potential that the game had, and the players knew it. 270,000 copies were sold, recouping its development cost and beyond within the first week of release. 2 months later, 1 million copies sold. Behaviour had well and truly struck gold. Fast forward to today, and you can begin to get a picture of the empire Behaviour Interactive has built, going from less than 30 employees back in the day to over 1,300. Now, I think this is a good time for a completely transparent disclaimer about Behaviour's total revenue as a company and why I put $1 billion in the title. Behaviour is a private company, so there's no way to 100% accurately know their total revenue, profit, expenses, etc. But if we use some kindergarten level math, we can get close enough to at least have an idea. In 2023, it's a fact that Dead by Daylight reached 60 million players, which was 10 million more than the previous year. Dead by Daylight costs $20 and regularly goes on sale for $7. If we split the difference and say it costs $13 1350, at 60 million players, that's $810 million. Given that DBD's player base has only continued to grow since release, if we continue the pattern of 10 million more players than the previous year, if there's 70 million total players, $13.50 per unit, that gives us $945 million. If you factor in all of Behavior's other sources of revenue like other game sales and royalties, Dead by Daylight cosmetics, merch, etc., the actual number is most likely way higher. Now reminder, I'm talking about total revenue here, not profit. Their profit will be significantly lower as they are a company with over 1,300 employees to pay and unimaginable expenses. If it's any consolation, Google's Gemini also put Behavior's valuation at $1 billion. So yes, this is in no way accurate, but whether their total revenue is $200 million or $2 billion, it doesn't really matter for the sake of this video. What matters is their impact. I just needed a reasonable number for the title. Anyways, yeah, don't at me. While riding high on the roller coaster of success, it's easy to glance over the red flags that could potentially bring the House of Cards down. There are a couple issues worth investigating around the infrastructure of Dead by Daylight that could spell disastrous for Behavior if they're not addressed. There is no denying that the formula for DBD is repetitive. Try to repair 5 generators and escape, or try to kill the survivors doing said generators. Rinse and repeat. To their credit, Behavior has tried spicing up the gameplay by experimenting with modifiers, which are limited time game modes designed to bring something fresh to the endless repetition of the game. Modifiers such as Lights Out, which drastically reduces the visibility and brightness, leading to a bigger focus on stealth and horror elements. Chaos Shuffle, which loads all players into a trial with a random set of perks. As well as 2 vs 8, which was highly praised by players, is exactly what it sounds like. 2 killers versus 8 survivors. Due to its very solid reception from the community, there is talk of 2v8 becoming a permanent game mode, which would be a huge change for DBD. However, even with its repetitive gameplay and balancing issues, there's no doubt Dead by Daylight's near decade-long run has been impressive to witness. And of course, what has undeniably carried the game's longevity is Behavior's collaborations with some of the biggest names in horror. Slasher icons such as Mike Myers, Leatherface, and Freddy Krueger, just to name a few of the very many. Introducing these fan favorites draws in huge hype as players can relive a sense of nostalgia from the POV of their favorite legends of horror. These franchise crossovers have earned Dead by Daylight its status as the pioneer of the asymmetrical horror genre. It's arguable that without these licensed characters, there is no chance Dead by Daylight would have lasted this long. And this can be proven just by looking at DBD's competition, who can never seem to last more than a few months. For instance, Video Horror Society, which was another 4v1 asymmetrical action game, officially shut its doors in 2023, citing simply that the game didn't generate enough profit to keep investing into. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre game, a 3v4 asymmetrical horror game, which was released on August of 2023, saw its all-time peak of 17,000 average players immediately drop off a cliff the following month. Now, it's no secret that DBD had a lot of luck to thank for its massive success, and maybe its competition just couldn't capture any bit of such luck. The exact same recipe done exactly the same way, but with a different context, could have failed. There's a huge amount of luck in how this thing panned out. However, for Behavior, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, and they're not immune from the possibility of their wild streak of luck running out either. Since Dead by Daylight's release, Behavior has failed to reproduce its success in any other game, and they have certainly tried. Death Garden was an asymmetrical survival action game that released on August 14th of 2018, which featured gameplay somewhat similar to Dead by Daylight in that a hunter went against 5 scavengers who had to try to escape. Development on Death Garden would cease the following year, citing a lack of interest from the player base. Witnessing the decreasing player base, we've been working on finding solutions. However, none of them would change the fate of this project. Meet Your Maker was a first-person shooter released on April 4th, 2023. In the game, players are tasked to build and raid user-generated outposts filled with traps and guards. To give credit to Behavior, Meet Your Maker was one of the few of their recently released games that is completely separate from the world of DBD, so at least they're trying something new. Meet Your Maker is still running and available for purchase, but looking at the active players via the Steam charts shows the writing on the wall. Going back to the world of Dead by Daylight, however, the casting of Frank Stone is an interactive drama horror game that was released on September 3rd, 2024. The game is set in the Dead by Daylight universe and is unique in the sense that it was developed by Supermassive Games and published by Behaviour Interactive. As cool as it is to see the world of Dead by Daylight in a new setting, the casting of Frank Stone has generally received mixed reviews, and the hype for the game seems to be quickly losing steam. And last, but certainly not least, we have the most recent failure at the time of making this video. Project T was, keyword was, a third-person shooter developed by Midwinter Entertainment, a game studio under the Behaviour Interactive umbrella, and published by Behaviour. Side note, Project T also appears to be a previously secret MMO FPS that Riot Games has been working on behind closed doors, but that one still seems to be in development. Anywho, of all the games mentioned thus far, this one I am personally the most bummed about not getting to play, as it seemed very promising. Project T is a 1 to 4 person co-op PvE shooter from the world of Dead by Daylight. Players will step into the role of trespassers, a fierce group of characters trapped within a vast, unexplored region of the entity's realm called the Backwater. Working together, you'll need to make use of trucks, talismans, and every weapon at your disposal as you navigate the perils of this new realm and battle a vicious army of monstrosities known as the Thrall. The gameplay was unique, yet the aesthetic and lore was enough to still scratch that DBD itch. However, just 4 months after it was announced, on September 17th, Behaviour dropped a statement announcing the shutdown of Project T. Citing poor results from a player feedback analysis did not show enough green flags to warrant them continuing to invest into the project. To add insult to injury, the shutdown of Project T came alongside the news that Behaviour was also closing down their game studio, Midwinter Entertainment, entirely. In a statement, Behaviour said, "This sad news in no way reflects the talent of the team, who put a lot of energy into Project T. All the employees were offered to relocate to our Canadian studios, as we strongly believe in their expertise. Should they decide not to accept, they will be presented with a generous severance package." With not only most of their recent games failing, but their entire studios as well, you can't help but wonder about the future of Behaviour Interactive. It is quite apparent the success of Dead by Daylight has catapulted them into a position few game developers will ever reach. But riding on the coattails of a single game isn't a very sustainable business plan. All good things must come to an end, right? But still, the numbers don't lie. Dead by Daylight is 8 years old at the time of filming this video, and it shows no signs of slowing down. Year after year, the player count has only trended upwards, and a similar story is told over on Twitch, where thousands of people enjoy watching others play the game every day, even almost a decade later. So I guess only time will tell. I wish nothing but the best for Behaviour and hope whatever path they choose to take leads to more bangers in the gaming industry. Given how far they've come and with what they've managed to accomplish, I think it's safe to say they've done a pretty good job so far.
Oh yes.